Hey, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here this morning, General Ham, and to the AUSA team. Thanks for having the Intel team here today. We're pretty excited about this. I'm joined by a few of my teammates, Ms. Diane Randon, Deputy G2 of the Army, and also the let's give her a round of applause. Yeah, why not? And also the senior U.S. Army Intelligence Sergeant Major Dennis Egger, also accompanying here. Dennis, awesome. So what I wanted to do today was have a bit of discussion on why the Army is going in the direction they're going with modernization. You all know what the Chief's priorities are. He's laid those out very, very clearly. Modernization, a centerpiece of what we're doing right now. I want to give you some strategic context of why we're doing what we're doing. Then I'm going to follow on with how it relates to kind of some past, present, future stuff with what we were doing in airland battle, where we're going in multi-domain operations, and then I'd like to bring it home to what the Army's ISR task force is doing and how we see that enabling capability going forward as we modernize that arm in our collective quiver here. So this is the layout today. I'll try to make this pithy and get to questions as quickly as we can. So let's go to the first slide, please. So a couple of years ago, Secretary Mattis gave us in his NDS the 4+1, 2+3, the strategic environment, if you will, starting at the top on the vertical scale, threat capacity and capability, and then how we view that over time. So on the top two, think great power competition and what that means for the Army and for our nation. Moving down the scale here, regional threats that keep us engaged on a daily basis with forces in the Middle East and in Indo-PACOM. And then violent extremist organizations, this thing that we've been doing the last 20 years and will continue to do so in the future. So let's start talking about this and build it out just a bit. Give me the first click here. So there are some things that are common to all with these threat actors. Number one, they hate us, and they hate our Western allies. They hate freedom-loving people, and they hate what we have. They also covet our capabilities, and they mimic our capabilities as they've modernized their forces. Something else common to all, they are attacking in cyber and in social media on a daily basis, and we see that across the board. And then lastly, I would say, and the picture by Vlad up here will tell you that they're all led by cult-like individuals, and it's interesting to watch their personalities play out as they proceed down the path here. So let's talk a little bit about Russia and Vladimir Putin. Well, when he came to power, his background as a KGB guy and a military guy, he knew what right looked like. And as he came to power, what he realized was that he had sort of a Soviet-era clunky army that was not very ready, not very good, and too big. And so as his wars proceeded, and he saw what we had done in Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom, the fact that we could develop capabilities out of air-land battle with the Big Five, that we could deploy those capabilities globally, that we could employ precision fires and effects on the battlefield in the early 90s, through the 90s, and into the early 2000s, he coveted that capacity and capability and wanted some of that. So as he set about his modernization program, he made his army smaller. He developed niche capabilities and tested those capabilities out in his near abroad. So think about operations in Chechnya, in Georgia, in the Ukraine, pulling that all together in Syria, where we saw special operating forces, we saw contract forces, we saw air and air defense, ISR capabilities, precision targeting, really for the first time kind of pulling that together. So in his strategic armaments program, he made his army smaller and better and more capable than it was 20 years ago. So when you think about Russia as a near-peer competitor, what he's done inside Europe as NATO has pressed up against him and expanded, he sees that as a threat, and he's pressing back in the near abroad. He does have some internal security issues. He has some economic issues. We've seen that play out this week with the price of oil. And as we think about Russia in the future, they've created some pretty interesting capabilities that give him some standoff capabilities. So think about his air and air defense. Think about his long-range precision fires. Think about lodgement operations in the European theater, and it's sort of a boxer stance where we might have a disadvantage with just a bit shorter reach. And so as we think about MDO in the future, this is what Russia brings to the fight right now. We're watching that very, very closely. I don't think that he wants to get in a toe-to-toe fight with the United States, but he does want to press that envelope in Europe. He wants to be regionally dominant and working to being a global player on the global stage. So that's Russia. Let's build and see what we project for them. Because of that economic impact that he's had and solely based on fossil fuels, we believe that in the out years, his trajectory is on a downhill slide economically, which will limit his ability to really do the advances that he wants in his military. The dotted line presupposes that he may have an economic upturn and he'll be able to modernize to the effect that he wants in accordance with his strategic armament plans. So that's the trajectory that we see for Russia at this point. Very, very dangerous, capable, not 10 feet tall, and we're continuing to watch them. Let's talk a little bit about China. So there's our man, Xi. Very interesting. He has been able to take what I would call if you think about a cable and 3 strands of a cable, he's taking this into his overall strategy. First, his political strategy to keep himself in power. We see him firmly and squarely in control. We see that he has disciplined the party. We see that he has reorganized his military, and he's worked on a modernization program as well. The second strand of his overall strategy is this economic strategy. Think of the One Belt Road or Belt Road Initiative, sort of a reverse of the Marshall Plan. He goes into countries that need financial help. He buys their debt. He builds infrastructure, puts forces and capability in place, and then he sort of owns that country. We see this play out across Africa. We've seen it play with our Middle Eastern partners. We've seen it play in South America. And what he's trying to do is connect markets. So think of his market in Asia connecting to European partners. Think about his market trying to connect to the Western Hemisphere. When we think about what China wants, think about global economic hegemony by 2049 and at the same time military parity with the United States to keep us out of his backyard or front porch, however you think about it. He would like to control everything out to the first and second island chain and just keep us out. The last piece of his strategy really is this military strategy, and we've seen it build out over time. He has put extensive capability and capacity into his military. He, too, like Putin, has made his army smaller. He's reorganized. He's given new capabilities in air and air defense, space, ISR, the entire gamut of warfighting functions he has built and putting those together. If you look at the islands in the South China Sea that he has militarized, a very effective defensive line there to do what he wants to do in the first island chain. If you think about his political, his military, and his economic strategy, that is this wrapped in this sheath of a cable, and that is the acquisition of information and technology. And if you look at the Chinese over the last 20 years, we've had the largest theft of intellectual property that we've ever seen. That's well noted and well documented, and much of the modernization that he's been able to accomplish is with technology that he's stolen from us and our partners. So when I think about Xi and his capability, where he wants to go with his army, it really is to keep us out of the Pacific. It really is to establish a new world order. They are jealous of the economic system that we have, the fact that the dollar is the currency mark globally. He would like to turn that around and make his currency the currency mark of the globe. So looking at China, we'll build that out next. We see his economy in ascension. He's going to be able to continue on this modernization path. And we don't see that changing now with COVID-19. I guess the temporary dip that we're going to have, the recession that we might get in, that might change that. But we generally think that that's the trajectory for China. Next build. So when we think about Russia and we think about China in the context of great power competition, is it the proximate threat or the pacing threat? When does that change? My take as the G2 of the Army is we've got to be worried about both these threats. And so the modernization that we're doing for Russia and the modernization that we're doing for China really will do the same thing for us in both theaters. And it's really about putting together multi-domain operations, multi-domain task forces. Organizations like I2Qs will help us in that boxer stance be able to get inside, penetrate the ability that they have to keep us out, and that's what we're working for in modernization. So that is the great power competition as we see it in the context. Let's move down and talk a little bit about some regional threats. So Iran, very interesting to many of us as we've been watching this. We have a saying that we want to be out of CENTCOM, but you can't really get out of CENTCOM. And as we've seen lately, this has been a perplexing issue. So think about it from Iran's perspective. We withdrew from the JCPOA for good reasons. We financially squeezed them with sanctions worse than they've ever been squeezed before. We declared the Quds Force an international terrorist organization to include Soleimani up there. And so we started to see them react across the Middle East. So while they were modernizing their own military capability with standoff capability, with air-to-air defense, ballistic missiles, building precision fires, building UAV capabilities, they also had their proxy forces in and around the Middle East operating against us. The difference between 2000 and 2020 is the launch pads that he has with these proxy forces in and through the Middle East. In the old days, it was probably Iraq only, but if you look at it today, it's more like Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, other places in the Middle East, Syria, all getting into the area where they can affect us and our operations. And so they become very active in the space. You saw that play out over the last 6 months. And since Soleimani has been killed, we've seen that start to simmer down just a little in the AOR. General McKenzie obviously watching this very, very closely with our RCENT forces every single day. But they still have the capability to close the Strait of Hormuz if they wanted to. They have the capability to employ military forces and conduct operations against us, and a threat that we have to watch on a regional basis. Let's build that out. So the dotted line presumes that they will not go for a nuclear weapon. The solid line presumes that they will. Really tough to put a read on that one. We don't know how that's going to go, and so there's a bit of an uncertain future there. Let's talk a little bit about North Korea. There he is, the man. 3 years ago, I would have said North Korea and the United States would never negotiate anything. It just won't happen. And then over the last 3 years, I think you would agree, talking is better than fighting. So those negotiations will continue. I don't know how the end will turn out, but we're hopeful. But in the meantime, Kim Jong-un has a capable, large, artillery-based army that is dangerous. Now, it's not the army that it was. He's been economically constrained for many, many years. But that artillery army based north of the demilitarized zone can be very, very dangerous for Seoul. So if you think about a military conflict on the peninsula, think about that artillery threat, the ballistic missile threat, while you're trying to execute operations in a NEO would be very, very dangerous. So I think we all agree talking is better than fighting here. He has continued to test and operate, experiment with his ballistic missile fleet. We see that on a weekly basis. Just this last weekend, he launched a few below the threshold right now, and it means that we just continue to watch this. General Abrams and USFK and our 8th Army partners very, very attuned to what's happening here. So let's build that out. The solid line assumes that he continues his nuclear pursuit. The dotted line assumes that we get him off that track, and that's where we're hoping to go. Again, an uncertain future here. So we have, in the context of great power competition with China and Russia, these two regional threats that keep us engaged in the Pacific and the Middle East, and that is an uncertain future. The last point on this slide, I'll just bring it out here. So the violent extremist organization threat. We've been fighting this fight for a long time, and I anticipate that we'll be fighting it for a long time to come. If you think about what's going on here, it's really about the ability to take advantage of a population at risk where there is a lack of governance, a lack of security. Al-Qaeda and ISIS will continue to morph, and we don't see that changing. Whether it's the Sahel, whether it's Africa, whether it's the Middle East, this is going to continue to morph, where a religion will be taken advantage of in the name of violence, and it's just going to continue to happen. So we see this playing out over time as a sine wave. It's going to continue at a lower level. Our great special operating forces will continue to play the away game on this. That's why the chief always talks about access, presence, and influence. Really, really key for us to maintain that with our partners so that we can have the launch pads to execute these kinds of operations when we need to in the future. So as we build it all out, that is what the threat perspective given to us in the NDS a couple of years ago looks like. It's how I interpret it as the Army G2, and this is how we talk about it. But if you think about where we're going in the future, think about where we came from in the past. So on this side of the chart, kind of the today, and on this side of the chart, kind of yesterday. So if you're an old soldier like I am and you came in the Army in the 80s, there's some of this that feels very, very familiar. So our air-land battle doctrine and what we did to the Soviets, the interactions that we had with China as they evolved in their political system, the Ayatollah and the embassy issue, and then Korea, really, I mean, when you think about it from the old days, father and grandfather were doing kind of the similar things. And then we've always had a problem in the Middle East, maybe we addressed it differently back then, but these problems are still here with us, and it feels to me like we're kind of reliving some of those moments in the past. And for everybody that served in our Army during this era of air-land battle in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, I think you can really reflect upon that, and thank you for your service to help defeat these. Okay, so that is a look at the threat. Now let's talk about the past a little bit. So over here we have the Soviet Union and we have NATO. What did we do to the Soviet Union? We outspent them. We defeated them with the best doctrine and operational strategy on the planet. It was called air-land battle. We came up with the Big Five. The Big Five are still with us. They're still important. And at that point, the intelligence assets that we had at echelon could see farther than we could shoot. And so we had all these assets, ground-based, both SIG and ELINT. We were able to jam. We had aerial assets at the division level and at the corps level that could actually see farther than we could shoot, so we could employ our precision fires and effects. And then for the rest of the world, as we deployed this capability to Desert Storm, and then we deployed it for Operation Iraqi Freedom, they saw that, and they saw how we fought, the fact that we could deploy a large force globally, the fact that we could employ fires with precision whenever we wanted to. They said, we don't want to fight like that. And so as I look at modernization of our near-peer competitors, they did not want to face this fight. And the characterization of their modernization really allows them to touch us asymmetrically, which is really why MDO is so important right now. So that was the Soviet era, air-land battle, best doctrine ever at the time, with the best assets that could see farther than we could shoot. Let's proceed into the modern era here. So in the modern era, the intelligence assets that we have right now for the Army cannot see as far as we can shoot. And so the whole goal for the ISR task force is to kind of get that turned around, so that the assets that we have, Prophets, Shadows, EMARS, Guardrail, they are all tremendous assets with capability. And some of them have actually been modernized against modern threat electromagnetic spectrum. But for the most part, as we develop these long-range weapons, think of the 1,000-mile cannon, Slurk, and these other assets, we will not be able to see that far. And as NATO has expanded and Russia sees that as they press into the environment, it's a very interesting time for us. So we know as we go forward, we're going to have to modernize against this great power competition for Russia and China. We're going to have to keep an eye on these regional threats, and at the same time, our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets have to keep a toehold on COIN and CT, while at the same time modernizing to be able to get after this threat in multi-domain operations. Next slide. So this graphic kind of represents the strategy for the ISR task force. And so a couple of years ago, I went to the chief and the secretary and said, I think we need to do more. They said, we agree. Stand up a task force. You can coordinate with whoever you want within DOD, partner with academia, partner with our defense contract partners, and see what you can come up with. So we approach this in layers. As I think about a slide like this, for us, it's really in a multi-domain operation turning gray icons red. What does that mean? Gray icons, I know they're out there. I know the bad guys are there, but I can't see or sense them in the environment. The icons that are red, we've got a bead on, and we can put precision fires on there. So what I need to do for our Army is to have the ability to turn these gray icons red so that we can see them first and we can shoot them and kill them first. We're going to do this in layers. So if you think about it, all of this is backed up by this thing called multi-domain intelligence. So if you want to do MDO, you have to do MDI. And in MDI in the future, it's all about the data, how we process, and how we pull AI into that. I'm pretty stoked about where the D6A program is going with capability drop 1 at the battalion level, capability drop 2, infusing AI into the data, getting it into the cloud, and making it much more user-friendly than it has been in the past and easy to access. But it's all about the data, and there's going to be a lot of it. So when I think about that for the ground layer, we're modernizing our Prophet system, which has been really, really successful in the COIN and CT fight, to the terrestrial layer system. So the Prophet collects. The terrestrial layer system combines signals intelligence, electronic warfare, and cyber, bringing more capability to the brigade level, and these will be seen at echelon in the brigade. So we'll have that capability on the ground. As we go aerial, we have this fleet of sensors and capabilities, manned and unmanned, that can do mostly coin and CT. In Korea and Germany right now, we're getting after the near peer, but we're not as high as we want to be, and we can't sense as deep as we want to. So we believe that you got to go high and you have to go deep. And so as we look at multi-domain sensing system, that will be some new platform. I'm platform agnostic. I just want the best sensors we can get to be able to sense that environment. So that's where we're going in the aerial layer. And then in space, it's really with our partners, taking advantage of all of the assets that are up there, whether they're national technical means or commercial satellites, to be able to do long-range precision fires in coordination with our aerial system and our terrestrial system. So think of this sensor grid from space to mud that is connected through multi-domain intelligence, using and fusing data at the speed of combat operations and decision-making for commanders. So when I look at the entire setup, where we want to go in space, aerial, terrestrial, with our Titan, our tactical intelligent targeting and access node is going to be the ground station that replaces a number of these systems that we have today, which is central to all of this. And so that's kind of where the Army ISR task force is going for modernization. And I think that's my last slide. I'm happy to engage in any questions that you'd like. Thank you.
Sir, thank you for that presentation. We do appreciate you being here today. I'll kick off questions while the audience thinks about a few, if that's okay. You talked about the threat environment at the beginning of your presentation, so I just wanted to pull on that thread a little bit. If China's economy continues to grow and China continues to steal intellectual property, how can the United States maintain its technological advantage?
Thank you. I think we need to get serious in our partnership with the entire acquisition enterprise and everybody who supports it. So think of what's happening in academia right now with all of the research facilities that we have, all of the unclassified research going on. Think about what's happening with our defense industrial base and some of the things that are happening with subcontractors. Think about putting a net over all of that and understanding who's who in the zoo, understanding where we can leverage partnerships, and understanding how we can partner with academia and industry to be able to prevent this kind of data loss. You'll be interested to know that there are over 360,000 Chinese student visas issued last year within the United States. During the Cold War, we issued very few visas to Russian students. I just find that as an interesting fact. So we got to be able to get after it. And from a counterintelligence perspective, we're working very, very hard on some concepts to do that.
So at least on my own account, we have it working. I just want to say how outstanding that presentation was. I mean, the clarity of what you said and how you went through all the domains is just outstanding. I have a good friend, Bill Hicks, who says in the Army, we do everything and then we do it right. And it sounds like you're getting there. So that's really fantastic.
Well, Bill had a little bit to do with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I want to just get you to kind of think about this as a primary staff officer of the Department of the Army. When I hear this presentation and I see where the G6 and our cyber are going, and their interpretation of information advantage, and I don't want to get into that historical argument between information and intelligence. Hopefully we've worked through that. But how do you see that developing, and how do you see information advantage giving us decision advantage and moving us faster across the goal line?
Right. I appreciate that question. Thank you. The first thing I would tell you is that Steve Fogarty, Bruce Crawford, myself, we're all very, very good friends, and we've known each other for 25 years, and so we're working this together. Steve stood up his organization, our cyber, as an information warfare command, and so for the first time, that's really kludging the kinds of things that you talked about. Bruce has a huge challenge with trying to modernize our network and get that set. And so as we go forward, thinking about what the future looks like, I see those disciplines coming much closer together. There will always be a separation of some of the intelligence disciplines. Think about counterintelligence. Think about human intelligence. Think about the authorities for signals intelligence. Those will always sort of remain separate and distinct to a military intelligence corps. But I do see the branches of MI, cyber, signal all coming together much, much closer in the future.
Hi, sir. Sidney
Hi, Sidney.
Freeberg.
Nice to see you.
For those of us playing along at home. Thanks very much for your presentation. I wanted to focus on the layers and, because we're in a very much a money-driven town,
Right.
The programmatics of that. I think there's a lot of uncertainty. Certainly, I'm very uncertain about what the Army's ambitions are for low Earth orbit space, whether we're talking about getting better access to what other services are doing, including the new Space Force, or whether we're talking about actually the Army having some kind of, LEO small sat quick launch responsive capability.
Right.
And on the lower layers, I'm very interested in the progress on, I guess it's MFU Air
Right.
pod
Yeah.
you guys are testing.
Yeah.
And TLS Large, which apparently is heading towards OTAs, I think this month or next, for prototypes.
So Sydney, you've given me a lot to unpack there. I'll start with space and in the Army that I know and that I grew up in. We've never really built rockets and launched satellites, and I don't think that's a core competency for us. And when I think of the expense of that, it would get pretty hard to do. But we do have a very forward-leaning secretary who's engaged with our partners in this area, primarily NRO, NGA, and USDI, to be able to leverage those assets that are up there now and to be able to get the architecture in place to really support multi-domain operations. So I don't see us in the rocket building, satellite building business. I see us in the leveraging partnerships that we already have to make the architecture better. In terms of the other layers, TLIS is coming along nicely, whether it's TLIS at the brigade level or our conception about what TLIS or that SIG and EW cyber capability should be at the division level. Those concepts are on the drawing board. In terms of money, you know what? Everybody's fighting for dollars, and so this is a primary enabling capability. While I am not a CFT director, we do have this task force. The Vice is our mentor. We bring him these issues, and we bring it to Army senior leaders, and I think they'll make well-informed decisions about how much of this capability we should buy. I hope that answers your question, Sydney.
The aerial layer also.
Right, yes. Yeah, so we're pushing forward. We know that we need to retain some of the capability for COIN and counterterrorism, but we also have to be able to get after Russia and China. And so to do that, we know we need to go high, and we know we need to sense deeper. And that are more than we have currently at this point, probably a higher flying platform with more power. And we're looking at options on the table right now. Sir.
Hi, General. Eric Schmidt with the New York Times.
Hi, Eric.
I was wondering if you could maybe expand a little bit about your comment about the death of Soleimani and the impact that's having on the threat from Iran, its proxies, and from the Quds Force in particular, especially as Iran struggles with the coronavirus.
So everybody knows Qasem Soleimani was in the 90s a really shadowy figure in their system, and then he sort of came out as the Quds Force expanded into this charismatic individual. And as time progressed and our wars continued in Iraq, he was a key player in the deaths of many. We all know that's well documented with EFPs and the other things that he personally supervised in Iraq for many years. So he was a fomenter of discord in the region. Since we took him off the battlefield, from my perspective, what we've seen is a simmering, if you will, of activity. Now, part of that's probably because we shocked them greatly with that targeting effort, but also what's going on with COVID right now. I think the regime is probably in a bit of tipsy-turvy as they try to deal with that issue. What the future portends, I'm not sure. Soleimani has been replaced. We don't know very much about the individual that has replaced him, but he probably is not a guy like Soleimani who had the Rolodex that he had to be able to institute and orchestrate that Shia proxy activity across the region. So it remains to be seen.
Hey, Sir Colin Agee.
Mr. Agee.
We've met before. I wanted to ask a question where we may need some help from the AUSA corporate members. And the competition, your slide mentioned that the competition happens all the time, and we're in it right now, and it might be a little different than the Cold War. So talk about things like space, hypersonics, AI, vis-a-vis these peer competitors.
Yeah, Colin, thank you. Number one, for all of my colleagues here, I would say that your intelligence force and your cyber forces in the U.S. Army are in contact daily with the enemy. In this competition space that we find right now, our intel professionals and our cyber operators are duking it out right now. So I kind of think of ourselves as cyber and MI as sort of combat arms. I know it's hard to get your head around that, but we're the ones that are kind of doing it right now. So I would appreciate you pumping that up with Army senior leaders whenever you have the chance. The other piece is we know that our adversaries are going to continue to modernize those things that you mentioned, hypersonics, AI. They're investing heavily in that technology. It is no secret that they're doing that. We have to lobby our Congress to be able to get the dollars to be able to do the same thing to counter that. This is really about, in great power competition, it's really about having the right capability at the right time. We need continued investment. This modernization path that we're on now is really, really key to everything that we're doing. So thank you for that question.
Hey, General Berrier, thanks for your time this morning. It was a great pitch. You talked about, and Army leaders often do, about industry, academia, government partnerships. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit as we go into an era where the budgets are going to be flat at best, if not actually in real purchasing power down. How do you leverage industry investments, and can you talk to any specifics about how you're going to try to get the most out of those relationships?
Right. Well, sir, great question. While I am not an acquisition professional in the 2 years that I've been on the staff, it's really clear to me that we have to have open dialogue and relationships that are lasting to be able to do this so that we can have the conversation. The Army wants to move much faster. Generally, that means more risk for our partners. So we have to be able to explain exactly what we need. And as I've been reminded here by a few of my colleagues, that sometimes we don't do a great job explaining what a requirement is. So I think we have to get better in the requirements development process, and the communication has to be open, clear. In terms of the ISR task force, we are very active in the TLIS space right now with developing those requirements, doing soldier touch points. We were very active as we developed capability drop 1 with soldier touch points, so I think that's key. I know the chief is interested in bringing soldiers into the space to make sure that what we're buying can be used effectively by our soldiers on the ground, and we need to do that better as well. So I think there are points out there that we can learn from and continue the dialogue.
Sir, great discussion. Thank you again for being here. Folks, please give General Berrier a big
Thanks,
round of
everybody.
applause.
Appreciate it.